So King Charles launched a podcast, and in this video, I want to break down some of the reasons why and what that means for you. And I think there's some lessons that we can apply to our own shows and some that we can look at and go, yup, we want the exact opposite of that. And so this is a very historical moment, which is why I'm covering it in the first place. I'm not some political expert on the monarchy or keep up with the royal family or something like that. I'm just covering this because it's a very historical moment in the world of podcasting, and that's something that we love to do on this channel on Pod Mahal. By the way, my name is Misbah Haque. In 2016, I started my very first podcast out of my childhood bedroom, and within a year, it landed me my dream job in the Bay Area, getting to coach Fortune 1000 executives and professional athletes. I also have gone on to launch shows that have done over 1 million downloads, and I now test out some of these strategies in real time on my own shows and with my consulting clients. So on this channel, make sure to check out some of the links in the description below. I think there's some free tools that might be useful in your journey. Anyways, let's dive back in. So one of the reasons that this is such a big deal is because we came fresh off the election. The election happened in 2024, and I made a whole video before, after on why it was such a big deal, right? This was a historical moment. Podcasting played a pivotal role in the US presidential election. Now, one of the predictions, if you go back and watch that video that I said, is that this validated the medium, the process, the power for the rest of the world, right? So you are now going to see many world leaders and many public figures hopping on podcasts or maybe even starting their own. And I was right. Since the presidential election, there have been a number of leaders that have gone on and used the power of this medium to connect with people and to maybe regain or build trust. But I have to say that King Charles was not on the list of my predictions of people that would, utilize this medium in any way. And it makes you wonder, right? Like somebody who is a king, your job is to do nothing and be nothing but be a king. What makes somebody want to get off their throne and actually take on the feat of starting a podcast? Now, the easier answer is probably attention, money, status, and those things are probably true to some extent, but I'm going to take it a level deeper because remember, we're looking at somebody where, okay, they have all the attention, they have all the money, they have all the status like you could want. So it may not be just those things. What are some of the other reasons that motivate somebody to want to take on such a hard project like this? And of course, let's not forget that for Apple, this is a genius move because remember with Spotify, they're paying out hundreds of millions of dollars to exclusive creators that will mainly be creating on Spotify first. You also have Amazon, for example, getting into the podcasting game. They recently signed on the Kelsey brothers from New Heights, right? And so everyone is getting their hands into the game, and it might seem discouraging at first, right? You're like, oh, smaller creators, we're not going to get these deals, but you shouldn't be shooting for those deals anyways. What you should be excited about is the pure net attention that is coming into the world of podcasting. There are hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be listening to podcasts that just didn't before. And because they consume maybe the King's show, right, they're going to have a couple other shows throughout their week that they're looking to fill that slot up with. And so this is where it creates opportunities for smaller creators like me and you when these big, massive celebrities, do these deals and bring millions and millions of new users to the platform. There's also a level of validation. So, okay, when the first deal was signed by Spotify, they signed a deal with Alex Cooper from Call Her Daddy. Now, to a lot of people, they may know who that is, but to many people, they did not. But when you look at King Charles, you're like, wait, even if I'm not familiar with the royal family, you're like, isn't that the king? Like you vaguely remember that that's who that is. So this is such a mainstream political figure, which makes this an even bigger deal that they would sign with one of these big companies, because we have seen some of the strategies already where some of the big politicians are going on other people's shows that have a lot of influence and whatnot already, and they're not having to take on the heavy job of having to produce their own show regularly. So keep that in mind as well. If you find yourself kind of dreading the process of maintaining your own show and it's preventing you from starting one, take the approach of some of these politicians, because what they've done is they've essentially done the guest route where they go on the most influential pods and they, make an appearance. It feels like a special appearance. It feels like the host that had them on validated them to some extent. And so this is a particularly unique case because the king has his own show here. He didn't go and really hype up the release of his podcast by appearing on other pods and, cozying it up with the other hosts out there in order to launch this thing. He just did it. Of course, this is a genius move for Apple because they have this exclusive face that they've gotten to sign onto their brand. Not only is it a music podcast, which complements Apple Music very well, but it complements Apple Podcasts very well and allows them to make a big move in that regard, even if they're just testing it. And if they want to do this with other, famous figures out there. Now, you'll probably agree with me that there's something else that allows people to fall in love with the genre of podcasting, because I've seen it over and over, celebrity after celebrity since 2012. The public figures who continue to pour energy into this medium when they don't have to, right? They have all the money, they have all the status. What's making them want to do this? Because remember, this medium is not forgiving if you are fake. No amount of money, power, status can buy trust. People can detect authenticity these days like it's a sixth sense. It's because we're so bombarded with things that are fake, things that are going to be more and more AI, to where naturally your brain is trying to decipher, okay, is this real? Is this not? And so one of the things that's going to be a byproduct of that is that it gets sharper. Like we all as humans just get better at being able to do that. That being said, okay, despite knowing all the things that could go wrong, what is making King Charles still come off the throne and show up behind this mic? My guess is that there are 4 things in addition to some of the typical things: attention, power, money, status, relevance. The first reason is trust. We know that podcasting is synonymous with building trust. It's not so good at just getting attention. The clips and things like that might be able to do that, but it's not the best at that. What it's the best at is building trust and allowing things to convert. And so when we take a look at somebody like King Charles, he is a part of an establishment, a part of, the royal family in a place where I'm sure people don't trust them all the time, purely because they're so big, famous, rich, powerful. There is a little bit of distrust that maybe comes with being in that position. And so instead of the normal press releases and the normal, appearances that a king has to do, this podcast is a way to show, hey, look, I'm trustworthy, right? I'm here, I'm talking unfiltered, I'm on a podcast, right? But notice how the actual topic that's being discussed is what? It's music. It's not like this is talking about, the history of the royal family and opening it up to all sorts of criticism in that regard. This is actually one of the smart things that I think that the king and his production team did, is they chose to go with music. Right? So they chose to build trust through this narrow topic where it feels like King Charles is trustworthy because he's talking about music. He revealed that he, was very impressed by Beyonce's performance. So all of a sudden in your mind, there's this association. Wow, the king, Beyonce. Oh my gosh, I can't believe the king's a fan of Beyonce, right? Like, it's just surprising you. And he's able to reveal these details that you feel like you just haven't gotten before, because in many ways you haven't. Like when else would we have gotten some of that information during these very formal events that the royal family typically is a part of? So there's this maybe false sense of trust that is being built because you're getting to know him through this one aspect of him, which is music. And it is something he genuinely likes. So it's going to allow him to be truthful, most likely, in that regard. But it's not going to open up all the craziness that might come with if we decided to discuss politics, right? Oh yeah, I'll talk about the royal family and the history, what we could have done better. Like all of a sudden, when you expand the scope of the topics that you might be covering for the royal family, for King Charles, it's a big no-no, right? We don't want to draw attention to that. Instead, what they're trying to do is, hey, look how trustworthy I am. Look how much I love music, how honest I am. And then right next to that, anything that King Charles is a part of after that, you're going to go, oh, right, King Charles, he loves Beyonce. Of course, he can't be lying. And so whether that's good or bad, that is kind of what's happening. It's at least worth acknowledging that this is how podcasting creates these strong connections where even though, let's say in the future, King Charles might be lying about something and not doing great stuff, because of this bond that he's building and developing through the pod, it's going to have millions and millions of people who have his back. The second reason is sovereignty. And I think that this seems kind of contradictory, right? You're like, oh, who could be more free and sovereign and independent than the king, right? He can do whatever he wants. He can say whatever he wants. But remember, some of that sovereignty of what you can say, what you can put out there is very highly filtered. There's offices that it goes through. There's tons of people who actually pick apart every word, every hair that he has to be able to present the perfect image. And so when you have something like a podcast, it allows you to have this ownership. And it's different than just having an Instagram. It's different than having a TikTok, because remember, both of those platforms, for example, are owned by, their respective owners, and they are subject to changing their rules at any time. Versus podcasting kind of operates on this RSS feed level where, okay, yeah, you've got YouTube, you've got Apple, you've got Spotify, but there's actually tons, dozens and dozens of platforms and directories. And by the way, people actually use them. You may not, but there are people out there who love Pocket Casts. I remember when I heard my client talk about that and asking if we could be, on there, I was like, really, you use that? And it's like, yeah, there's tons and tons of platforms out there, and that's only going to increase, right? You've heard of Substack getting into podcasting. And so how are you able to be in so many places at once? It's because of that URL, that RSS feed that you've developed. You usually use that to then submit your show to whichever directory that you want. What this does is it decentralizes things a little bit, right? So this decentralization that kind of happens is not just for if you get canceled and, Spotify canceled me, but Apple didn't, and I can still be on all of these other directories. It's not just that. It is the idea of owning your narrative. When you are a public figure like King Charles, you have, I'm sure, media and PR disasters all the time where people are constantly gunning for you. They're trying to own the narrative. They're trying to bring something up or, get something to catch on fire in the headlines where, okay, now the attention's focused on them. Versus if you have a music podcast and you seem very fun, you seem super relaxed, you are having a great time, you're being truthful, right? That is setting a more valuable narrative for, I'm sure, what King Charles and his team wants to portray than just leaving it up to the major networks that have been doing a terrible job of this in the first place. The third reason is expression. I am sure that the constraints of royal life are pretty insane. Like, I can't put myself in that position and just be like, wow, okay, you really can't be yourself. Even if you are the king, you have to be this character, this version of the king that, the royal family wants you to be. And so there's this sense, I am sure, of, feeling this void of not being able to express yourself, right? Because if everyday people like me and you feel this, this human need to express, to be creative, to make things, to think of things, like, okay, for somebody who has it all, has all the money, has all the power, but has been very silenced or very, curated in terms of what they're going to say, I'm sure that there is this desire inside of them to express something. And guess what? When you choose the right thing that you want to express, this is a thing that podcasting does a great job of doing, by the way, is showcasing all the weird things that you don't expect that person to really be into. So instead of wasting this opportunity to be expressive, if King Charles just did a traditional interview styled podcast, and let's say he wasn't actually excited about that kind of thing, that would be a missed opportunity, in my opinion. Versus, okay, you have all the attention already, you have all the money, like, choose something that you actually do care about, that, you are going to have fun talking about, because this is your chance, right? No other platform, Instagram, TikTok, gives you this kind of opportunity. Like, yeah, make it up. We'll listen. If you create the structure of the show, you're in charge of the format. It can be anything you want. So remember that, because in a time where you want to be expressive, you want to showcase another side of you that normally isn't. And in this case, it's music. Like, the king is not associated with Beyonce and the top music that we're listening to day in and day out. But clearly, it is a passion of his, it's a taste of his that he has not gotten to really shine a public light on. And so this show creates an environment for him to dive into his taste, tell stories, make connections about music that, seem unrelated and you normally would not get to hear. The takeaway from this point for you is that the creators who bring their full passion to the table and bring their full personality to the table, those are the ones that go the furthest. I think the King's Music Room is a great example of being able to do that. It's like, if you want to be expressive, narrow the constraints, right? It doesn't have to be you're just talking about music. But clearly for the King, it's like he niched down until he was like, yep, this is the one thing I can be interested in, I will continue to be interested in, and I'll keep talking about it. I could talk about it for days. So think about that. What are some things for you where you have this authentic enthusiasm? Because if you have that for your subject matter, that typically will resonate harder than just the most polished material. Now, number 4 is legacy. At 76 years old, I am sure that King Charles is thinking about legacy and what he wants to leave behind, what he wants the world to remember him for, what he wants to contribute. And so it's very fascinating that he could write a book. He could do anything, but instead he chose to go with a podcast, which, remember, years ago, I've been around and doing this since the days that it seemed like this, like, what are you doing? Like, it doesn't seem valuable. It's not going to go anywhere. It was treated with that kind of an attitude, right? Like, oh, write a book instead. Why are you doing a podcast? That may be something that would be a remark that would come from one of his team members if he brought this idea up 5 years ago, 7 years ago. So it should say something that the King is deciding to go with this medium of podcasting, which allows him to be more of himself than he would be in maybe other formats. And it allows him to create this body of work that I constantly talk about, where you are creating that naturally with every episode that you do, whether you only do 10 or you end up doing hundreds, right? There's this body of work that's forming, which, it may not seem relevant to us, right? After the King passes, like, oh, we're going to go consume all of his podcast episodes. But I guarantee you that 50 years from now, when history books are being written and people are diving into what the King was like, just think about some of the historical figures we grew up learning about, like Albert Einstein. Like, if Albert Einstein had a podcast where, even if it was solo, right, where he's just talking to you for an hour at a time every week, he's casually, revealing certain things while he's discovering the theory of relativity, or, when he, like the whole Oppenheimer situation, right? Like, what's going on from his perspective during all of that? Like, it would be wild for us to access his head inside our headphones. Let's be real. King Charles is not sitting down with a Blue Yeti and just hitting record. He has a very, very experienced team of producers, editors, designers, all sorts of people in his corner, making sure that every piece of the process is flowing as perfectly as possible. There's likely extensive pre-planning, topic approval, all sorts of that stuff to make sure that nothing too controversial actually makes the cut. But remember, the genius here lies in creating this perception of unfiltered access. The podcast format itself allows you to feel like you're getting access to this off-the-cuff, casual King Charles, the real King Charles, when every word has likely been vetted already. It's a calculated risk that's trying to balance this royal, dignity with human connection. What's fascinating about the King's podcast venture is that it highlights this modernization, right? This acceptance of podcasting into culture, where it feels like for years since, 2004, 2005, it's like podcasting has been fighting year after year to cross the chasm, to cross into mainstream culture, and to be viewed as a serious and normal medium and platform. And even after you have these $100 million deals and, the top of the top people trying to be on as a guest, right? And wanting to be a part of other people's shows, like, while all that was going on, there was still this resistance, I feel, that mainstream culture had to taking this seriously. And then all of a sudden, it happened. 2020 is when things really began to shift. And of course, 2024 is when I feel like, we really put the nail on the coffin, right? Where podcasting is here to stay. It is here to be a part of our culture. It is here to be a part of how we connect as humans. And, part of that is that public figures and politicians, they've figured that out as well. They've seen it, and you're going to see them try to take advantage of it. I'm not saying this is King Charles, but there will be several, I'm sure, to come that are going to do that. What I want to highlight is that it will be easier to spot. It will be easier to see when someone's coming on and they're being fake and they're just trying to earn your trust versus somebody who's being genuine and being themselves. So while we can learn from King Charles's podcast strategy, it's important to acknowledge that your journey will be nothing but royal. And that's actually going to be the secret weapon. You don't have a royal communications team or a Netflix level budget. You may not have millions of followers or built-in press coverage for your launch. And most importantly, you don't have the constraints of the royal title, which is limiting what you can say. So your podcast strategy needs to be fundamentally different. As a non-celebrity creator, you're building from zero. You're finding your voice in real time and creating these authentic connections without the safety net of fame or fortune. So if you're ready to develop a podcasting strategy that is made for creators like you and not just for royalty, then check out the links in the description below or head over to podmahal.com. I have tons of free resources that I offer to help you get going and to help make this process easier. I hope this was useful. Drop a comment with what you thought. I would love to hear from you. I appreciate you hanging out and taking the time, and I will see you on the next one.